7. Went to Alaska. There's not even really anything around here. Good evening. It's 7 p.m., October 4th. We'll call the meeting to order. And I believe the first order of business is the roll call.
Yes. So, Member Bowman,
Present, participating remotely because of contagious illness.
Member Kerr, Member Papalia,
Here.
Member or Vice Chair Priven,
Present, also participating remotely due to illness.
and Chair Trainer.
Present. Great. I'll read the land call acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Listjohn. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Item 2 is the approval of the minutes from the June 7th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve? We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So to vote on approval, Member Bowman,
Yes.
Member Kerr, Member Papalia,
Yes.
Vice Chair Priven,
Yes.
and Chair Trainer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so we're now at the announcement section where staff and committee can make announcements. And I'd like to make an announcement just to start off the meeting. We haven't met since the June 7th meeting, so it's been about four months. And we've had some transition within the city. I would like to acknowledge that Heather Rowden resigned her position as City Finance Director in August, and I would like to thank Heather for her service to the city. Cassie Murphy, formerly the Finance Manager, has been appointed Interim Finance Director. And during this period of staffing transition, I'd like to just underscore that the Finance Department may face challenges in meeting their normal reporting schedule to this committee. So I would ask us all to please be patient as we navigate this new situation together, and let's strive to keep the tone of the meetings cordial and in the spirit of partnership with the city staff. So I hope we can work together to keep the environment conducive to dialogue and meeting our stated goals. Are there any other comments or announcements?
We have two staff announcements. I do want to, again, thank you for that statement, and thank you as a committee for your patience and understanding during the transition. Part of that transition, I would like to introduce Ava Ng. She is acting finance manager during this time, so she will be sitting alongside me and joining us for these meetings going forward. Second announcement I'd like to make is that the auditors will be on site October 16th. They'll be here for the week, and staff is diligently working on all requested items ahead of their visit. So we are definitely busy right now.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or announcements?
We do have a virtual public comment. I don't know if that's along with announcements or if that's anticipating the public comment section.
I guess we do have the public comment section as item number 4.
I was hoping that we'd get a little introduction by Ava about she got here and
Oh, that's
background.
That's a great idea. Ava Ng, would you care to introduce yourself to the committee?
My name is Ava Ng. I've been with the city since 2017, started as a accounting technician. I am now currently a financial analyst and helping Cassie out now as acting financial manager. So, I'm here for 6 years.
Okay. If there are no other announcements by the members of the committee, we'll go ahead and move to the public comment section. Do we have any public comment?
We do have from a virtual attendee.
Good evening. This is Margie Marks. At the last City Council meeting on Monday, someone asked if Airbnbs were taxed. The response was that the owners have to get a business license in Albany. I went online and could find no additional fees in Albany for Airbnbs. I looked at what other cities were doing. San Francisco taxes 14% transient tax for all rentals less than 30 days. Oakland taxes 14%. Berkeley taxes 12% transient tax plus 2% enforcement fee. Richmond has rules that are very complicated that make it hard to even have an Airbnb. I want the city of Albany to look at taxing stays at Airbnbs of less than 30 days. Daily hotel taxes in this area are 14% each day. Many times Airbnbs take what could be long-term rentals off the market. I believe that taxing Airbnbs could be a great source of revenue for the city. I would like to see the money go into an Albany housing voucher program. At least 2 city council members have expressed interest in this, and consideration of it was added to the housing element. Please don't wait on this. Albany was the last city in California to pass a soda tax before the soda industry was able to get a law prohibiting any other city from doing it. That soda tax has made a difference in our city by paying for the crossing guards that protect our children when they walk to school. I know there's a great desire to provide some funding for housing for low-income people, and this could be a source. The second issue I want to bring up again is the Public Bank of the East Bay. I'm asking you again, please, at the very least, schedule a speaker from the bank just to get information out there. The Public Bank of the East Bay is the first public bank in over 100 years to actually hire a CEO, and it will open. The public bank would keep municipal money local, allowing local governments to divest from Wall Street while reinvesting the profits back into Albany. This bank is going to open right now. Berkeley, Richmond, Oakland, and the county of Alameda are signed on. All I would ask you to do at this point is please just get a speaker, like schedule it for a meeting, invite members of the public to get their input on this. I just think it's an opportunity to put money back into our city. And the bank is going to open, and I'd really like to see Albany be part of it. Thank you very much for all of your time. I know it's not easy being on a commission and being there every month, but thank you for doing it. Bye.
Okay, thank you for that comment.
I did want to address the transient occupancy tax portion of that comment. The city does have a transient occupancy tax that we do charge on short-term rentals. We, alongside that, do require that they do have a business license to operate within the city. It's not a massive revenue stream for the city, but it is something that we do currently collect on.
What's the percentage?
I would need to look up that percentage. I realized as she was speaking, I didn't know that one offhand. I believe it is on par with Oakland, though. I will need to confirm that.
Are there any more public comments?
No.
No, okay. Right, so that takes us to section 5, the presentation section of the agenda. And item 5.1 is a fiscal year 22-23 budget review report from Cassie Murphy.
And I'm going to ask Ava to share her screen alongside the staff report. I also just prepared a brief, quick presentation with a few slides, a few talking points leading to the greater discussion of the staff report. A moment here. Okay. That's okay. I can continue without the slides. Let me double check something here. I have them. It's okay. Okay. I would click open in PowerPoint on that blue. Okay. Sorry for the pause. To start off, this presentation was based on the numbers at the time the information was pulled. Any required adjusting entries found by either staff or auditors may shift the numbers, so This report, along with the staff report that was previously sent to you, does reflect the data for the point in time at preparation. Go to next slide. Kind of a quick overview. The fiscal year 2022-23 year concluded with a surplus of $1.819 million. We had been budgeted at a deficit, so this was good news. We had a savings of about $546,000, so we were under budget, but we did come in close to projected numbers. The biggest city costs were salaries and benefits, as expected and along with typical trends. Salaries were under in departments with vacancies, and the police department and the fire department are the two departments within the city that tend to have the highest recurring vacancies. I would like to point out too, overtime does count towards the total salary numbers for the year, so despite departments with vacancies needing to utilize overtime for staffing, they were still able to stay under budget. On top of salaries, departments did work to stay under their expenses outside of salaries for the year. Finance staff is keeping regular communication between our staff and departments to inform them of their current budget numbers as the year goes on, so that careful spending can continue as well. Go to the next. So another great piece of news is revenues exceeded expectations by $3.789 million. This is the reason we didn't have a deficit. Again, expenses were fairly close to projections, so the reason we have a surplus are the fact that our revenues beat our expectations. Property tax and sales tax remain the strongest revenue streams for the city. Property tax revenues increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. Homes were selling at record rates. The property was then taxed at the value of the new assessment during the sales process. Improvements to homes also increased during the COVID-19 lockdown, and certain improvements can also increase the assessed value of a property. Sales and use tax have remained a steady stream of income for the city. This was an area that was expected to decline during the COVID-19 lockdown, and that did not occur, and it, again, remains a steady income stream, so there's no slowing in that area. And go to the next slide. Kind of along that point, our community development department showed a strong revenue performance for construction permits specifically. This item earned 168.55% of their projected revenue for fiscal year 22-23. Construction permit demand also increased during the COVID-19 lockdown alongside those home improvement projects that citizens were going through. This is an area that was expected to slow after recovery and reopening, but it has continued to bring in revenue at an increasing rate. There is, of note, a large project on Keynes Avenue that may be contributing to the increase in revenue, at least for this fiscal year. And that until that large project wraps up, it may continue to increase this. So with those factors considered, the budget for this revenue does remain at pre-pandemic levels to avoid anticipating a revenue that might not be permanent. That budgeted revenue is $380,000 per year, and these are the numbers for the past 4 years, so it's been exceeding it. I did think it was worth it to note this area, as I feel it somewhat explains the strong property tax revenue that we've been seeing, and you can see the trend line of these improvement projects. And again, it may not translate all the time to property values, but it seems like there is a connection here. Final slide on revenues. The Recreation and Community Services Department had the largest surge in revenues over what was budgeted. The state lifting the COVID-19 state of emergency on February 28th, 2023 allowed the department to fully open, which made way for the public to utilize the department's services. This was our department that was hardest hit by the lockdown, and they totally had to reshift and revamp and strategize what to do. So it was good news to see this recovery this year. Demand for services were strong in quarter one, but a larger than expected continuation of that demand was present in both quarter three and in quarter four. Courses, leases, and especially camps brought in much more revenue than we had anticipated. The revenues for this department continue to be projected with caution in fiscal year 22-23 due to the uncertainty of recovery, and we hadn't seen this level of recovery up to this year. Again, keeping in mind with that caution, the revenues for fiscal year 23-24 were budgeted to be projected higher than what we were previously budgeting for this department, but we're not projecting at the same level of what we realized in 22-23. A clarifying example of that, for fiscal year 22-23, recreation classes had a strong showing at $175,000. It was budgeted at $40,000. So now for fiscal year 23-24, we have it projected at $150,000. So again, not meeting where we were at, but we are responding to that increase in demand while still realizing we may not perform as well as we did. Next slide. So in summary, departments stayed under their budget. Revenues were strong, and because of both, we ended the year with a surplus. Staff is recommending any reappropriations of that surplus to be held off until the audit is finalized. So with that, I'll conclude and turn it over for comments or questions from the committee.
Does anybody have any questions on the report?
This slideshow is in lieu of having you go over the staff report, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I didn't want to go through something that was lengthy and potentially read by members already. So just to give a supplemental and kind of an overview of what was outlaid in the report.
Well, I have some detailed questions. What is COVID leave?
COVID leave is a bank, so similar to a sick bank. The difference is, so the city is paying the cost for the employee to be out sick. The difference is the employee doesn't accrue it. The city is essentially allowing an additional sick bank on top of the sick bank already offered to employees as part of their benefits.
So they don't have to use their sick leave time.
Right. They can save their sick time for incidents outside of COVID.
But this is for COVID-related specifically? Okay, because there was 2,311 COVID hours were coded. So this was, and just so that we get, do you have any idea how, in a year, how many sick leave hours does the staff have that would be eligible for COVID?
I didn't run that analysis because the sick bank is something that is guaranteed to employees regardless, whereas COVID is an additional benefit that the city has extended beyond the requirement. So I thought it was worth pointing out that it may have an impact in the expenses overall, since we're allowing them additional leave and not exhausting their sick bank.
And that program runs through 12/31/23? So
Yes.
first 2 quarters of the new fiscal year?
Yes, so we are going to continue it this fiscal year, yes.
You're going to continue it when?
Through December of this year. So it will potentially impact this fiscal year as well.
Okay. Page 4 of your report, there were credit card fees. And I'm always, so when people pay their fees to the city, they're able to use credit cards. Only now, you now have the ability to charge a service fee to people who use their credit cards.
Yes, so we are actually still in the process of getting that software ready, but the previous software didn't have the ability to pass through. So we are going to, before the end of this calendar year, I am hoping that that software is up and running and we can pass that fee on.
So the staff report says that the city began passing on credit card processing fees to the customers July 1, 2023.
When the software allows, I believe I said that. There are, so for finance specifically, we have not yet began to pass through, but we have other departments who process payments that have started to pass through effective July 1.
And I'd love to be able to find out, because I'm just so curious, how much do the credit cards charge the city
So that,
when someone uses their credit card?
yeah, that number in the report, I believe was 45,000. That's what the city pays. So because we've been absorbing the cost, we've been paying that amount.
Right, but do you know what that amount is in terms of a percent?
Oh, in terms of a percent against what?
It's,
Well, for instance, sometimes I have to pay,
Oh,
I get charged 3%.
It depends on the credit card. I mean, it depends on the carrier, because part of it is service to the credit card processor that we use, and the other part is that credit card processor is passing through the credit card fees from Visa, Amex, MasterCard to the city. So they're not paying it, we are. And it varies depending upon carrier.
Are there inexpensive carriers and then some are
Yes.
more expensive than others? Who are the expensive ones?
Amex is probably the most expensive.
I think they average around 3% or slightly less, just in general. I
Yeah.
don't know about for the city, but.
So in general, we're paying around 3%? And someone
Yeah.
pays a bill for $100, just so you know,
Right.
when I pay the city, I try to use a check.
Right.
So that, why am I giving my money or our money to the credit card company? So I wanted the public to know, all you're doing is, maybe you get miles or something, but we're not getting the money that we need to provide the public services.
Right, and part of the new software is having an e-check option as well, and that has a flat rate. So that's one of the reasons we're moving to the software that we are, is to have a flat rate, so regardless of the amount, we can anticipate the rate.
One final thing is that in this report, I think you refer to the LAIF, or maybe not. I just have the note in the report. And this is just one issue that I would like to bring up in general. And it will come up again when we look at the CAMP program. That acronyms are, a very, very important part of this committee, as designated by the city council, was to enhance independent oversight and fiscal transparency. And I have, for a couple of years, tried to get better transparency in our reportage. And one thing that I wish that you can do in the future is, particularly if it's online, print out, and give the name in full so that we all get to know what that is, because I don't know if anyone can tell me what an LAIF is at this point. But, they bear repeating, and when we read it over and over, it kind of sticks.
Yeah.
And then the public gets a better idea, and they don't get, I think they get disinterested. The more acronyms that are put in front of them, the less interested they are in listening.
I thought I had spelled out all my acronyms in the report, and I missed that one. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I will continue to do that. Oh, is it on the camp?
No, but the camp doesn't say what camp is. And I know that the camp isn't anything like what any camp I ever went to. It's the California Assessment Management Program, and camp is very assessment program-y.
So the LAIF is the Local Agency Investment Fund. It's a state fund for agencies. So I will be sure, when noted, to spell it out the first time in future reports.
And just to take that just a small bit further, so like when you say LAF and then you put in, it's a state-run investment fund, if we could put something like that in the report, so like below, it's like an index, showing that we understand that. And once again, it's not just for us, but for every public person who ever
Oh, right.
reads this.
I mean, it's a public document. It makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I put my hand up. Just had one question. Was reviewing the budget to actuals and noted that a line item current service charges was 500,000 in surplus of the budget. It's a revenue line item. So that'd be a good thing, but I just didn't know what that was referring to specifically. If you could help me understand that a little bit better.
I also had a comment on that, and I wondered if that was tied to the Department of Recreation expense that was also over budget by about 500,000 because of the increased interest in classes and so forth.
Right, the service charges, and I believe the line item you're referring to is on the audit overview. So it's the collective city. Is that right?
I think if you look at the budget to actual, the first page for the general fund, current service charges is one of the revenue items.
Yes.
And it's about $450,000 over budget. And I wondered if service charges, and Member Bowman is asking the same question.
Right.
Is that related to the recreation, where it exceeded expectations and more people participated in classes and things like that?
Yes, so that will be a combination of the rec service charges. We do have a service charge at the front desk there. In addition to other departments with service charges, finance, for example, we have one for the passport processing. We charge a service fee for the location to process it. So this line item is a combination of, I believe because of the massive number, it will be related to rec because that is where we saw the highest jump in revenue, but this is a combination of service charges from all departments within the city.
That answer your question, Member Bowman?
Yeah, so are they service charges on top of like the rec fees, or is this the rec fees in of themselves?
They're like location fees, so it is on top of the fee. So there's fee for service charges across departments, and let me pull up the rec detail here. It is a separate line item that is charged alongside the transactions. And it's not addressing the credit card fees. That is a charge we've always had to supplement staff salary.
I guess hearing that, I guess I'm just surprised that it is the magnitude it is. If it's just service charges on top of other fees and not inclusive of the rec fees. This isn't a particular like big deal. I just didn't understand what this was and wanted to get a better grasp on it.
And I'm looking at rec specifically on the current service charges, and those are the areas where it's hitting the like 200 to 300%, which is creating that larger on the audit overview, the line item for the overview. So I believe that's more reflective of not that it's a large charge, it's just that the revenue was in a much greater number, so that pulled in a greater amount of service charges for the city for the year.
Okay, thank you.
Are the recreation class fees in that line item, or are they in a different?
They're a separate line item. Yeah, the charge for service is the location charge. So again, it's similar to the passport fee. We have the fees for the passport, and then we have a passport fee associated with that to make up for the staff time for running the program. So there is a service charge at the recreation center alongside that. So there is the class fee or the camp fee, and then there is the service charge as well. And I can confirm that with the department head to make sure I'm communicating that clearly, but that's my understanding of the service charges at the various locations in the city.
So where are the class fees and camp fees and things like that? What line item are they in?
I don't believe they are. Look here. Where does that? Revenues. I would need to find what feeds into that. Let me see here.
Well, it was just a minor point, I think. I don't think we need to hold up the proceedings to find that out. If you come across that, next time you could let us know, that'd be great. Did you have additional follow-up questions on that, Member Bowman?
Oh, I mean, I think I'm just having the same reaction to you as I couldn't figure out where those fit in when we were talking about them a second ago. And it looks like that might be the obvious place. And service charges of 1.6 million just seems like a big number. So I thought it could be in there. But I agree. No more follow-up.
It is the same line item. It's difficult to compare the broader range of what feeds into those individual lines because that specific page is every single department within the city in that category. But if I'm looking at the rec line specifically, this charge for service camp fees, so it is the revenue from that program.
Okay, that makes sense, because looking at all the other different revenue line items, there's not a fee-for-service type line item amongst the other captions there. And also, the amount that the current service charges are over budget is very close to the amount that the recreation expenditures are over budget. So it seems like those two would go hand in hand.
Right, they did need to exceed their personnel budget to staff the classes that they were offering and the programs they were offering.
Okay, Member Vice Chair Priven, did you have questions and comments?
Yeah, I got two. Thank you. So one is actually about the rec department. It's funny, we're all keying in on this. But obviously, there's just such a swing in the activity. And I just want to make sure that the rec department has the flexibility to, as you mentioned, kind of change their personnel or change their expenses as demand for rec services changes. So it seems like that happened last year because revenue was much higher than expected, but expense was higher as well. So I'm kind of inferring that that the rec department has the flexibility it needs to change the personnel when people are signing up for things like camp and courses and stuff like that. And I guess I'm thinking about that for next year as well, or the current year, because it seems like you budgeted appropriately, maybe a little bit conservative on the revenue. But if it turns out that the demand for rec services are high, I just want to make sure the rec department has the flexibility to meet that demand and not be like, well, this is our budgeted expense. We can't do anything about it.
Yes.
Is that?
Good question. They do have that flexibility, especially because we do have vacancies. So we, as departments, all have our individual salary budgets to stay within, but we also don't want to turn away revenues solely to stay within the expenses of salaries budget that we have. I can double check as well, but I believe we budgeted expenses, again, more alongside what we saw in fiscal year 22-23. We typically take the salary from the prior year and increase it. So that would likely have been something, while we address the revenue increase, we also address the expense increase, anticipating that in order to maintain that staffing for that revenue we're expecting, we would need to spend more.
Okay, thanks. And the second question is, it looks like investment return is a little lower than expected for the year. And I'm guessing that's because getting the funds invested was a little bit later than anticipated. as opposed to it having a lower return. But I guess I just wondering if that's true.
Yes, so we, in the camp, we remained in the camp pool longer than anticipated, so we didn't invest in securities until July. So that was much later than we set the money in there and much later than, again, we had expected, which was why I wanted to have the investment banker, PFMAM, come and present to the committee next week so that you can see how we're doing now that we're in securities from the first quarter.
Perfect, thank you.
Did you have any?
Yeah, I have, as a layperson, when I look at the budget to actuals, I try to scan through and look at the percentages and see what jumps out at me. And I wonder if that's how you look at it, too, or if there's a better way for me to actually take a look at this information. What I did notice is that there are some line items that are pretty drastically off budget, and some of them are large dollar amounts and some of them are small dollar amounts. But how does that variance feed or inform next year's budget? Is it reviewed within the department and the city manager? What actually happens with this information internally in the city?
So I start the same way. Anything that stands out on the broad overview, I dig into more to find analysis on. And so that's where I start, and then the following pages are where all that detail comes from. And with the departments, we give line items for budgets, kind of projecting, but as you can see, it's hard to project from year to year. So departments do have the freedom to stay within their expense budgets and not tied to line item. And we do try to utilize the trending expense items to judge how to budget for the future. And we do that with revenues as well.
Yeah.
So it's again, you're not really tied to a specific line. You have a budgeted expenses. If you exceed in a certain area and you go under in another area, that makes up for it within your budget, your broader budget.
And then just as a brief follow-up to that, one of the categories that, there were 7 that jumped out at me from the report, 7 line items. And one of the categories that seems to recur is miscellaneous expenses or other expenses. And that's an area that I would imagine that unless somebody talked to the department heads to really explore what that miscellaneous expense was, it would be difficult to adequately budget for the future years. So that's the point I'm making.
Yeah, that's correct. The miscellaneous expense is basically the catch-all for unanticipated items that you would need to budget for, but you can't really assign a line to it. It's essentially what they are.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of other comments too. Some of my questions were addressed by others. The camp fund. So some of the cash and investments were transferred from the local agency investment fund and some of the excess cash into the camp fund. And I don't know if I read somewhere or I just assumed that it was just in a money market fund as of June 30th. Is that right?
So we transferred from the money market fund to camp earlier in the year than that, but it was in camp in the pooled fund instead of investing in securities until June.
What does the pooled fund mean? Is that just a money market, or was that invested in other stocks and bonds and things like that?
So it's similar to the LAIF. So it earns about the same as LAIF. It's like a pooled fund of investment from the city, but from other agencies as well. But it's not in securities at all.
So it's expected to earn a pretty small rate of return.
That's right.
A few percent.
Yeah, that's why, as Member Priven pointed out, it was not the return we were expecting or hoping for, rather.
Okay. And then the follow-up question is, I know we've discussed the city investment policy in these meetings, but I'm not sure if I've ever seen the finalized investment policy. And maybe we did, but I don't remember seeing that. I remember talking with the investment consultants and, just discussing all the different points of that policy. But is that final policy posted somewhere?
I can find where it is posted if it is. If not, I'll forward it to the committee. It is finalized. I believe I received an email when it was, but I can't remember the date of that right now. But I can get that to the committee to look at.
Okay, I don't want to belabor all the fine points of that policy, but I would imagine is it targeting an investment return within a certain range? And if so, what is that?
I was just speaking with our investment manager because I needed to learn that piece as well. And part of her presentation next month will be going over how we're hitting that benchmark or how we're performing with that benchmark in mind. Let me pull up my email from her. Okay, forgive me. The city's benchmark is 0 to 5 year U.S. Treasury Index. So ICE B of AML 0 to 5 year U.S. Treasury Index. So that is our benchmark. Not the expert on investments by any means, which is why we have an investment manager.
So if the benchmark is a 0 to 5 year U.S. Treasury Index, and if U.S. Treasuries are returning somewhere in the 5% range right now, I'm assuming that must be the target range, is that current range?
I would believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you. Then my only other question was, so we're projecting a surplus for fiscal 22-23, which is great, $1.8 million. And I understand that number will fluctuate based on final results and the audit and any adjustments. But can you remind us of what was the final decision on how the surplus from fiscal 21-22 was allocated?
I would need to look that up. I do know that we did move money to reserves as of July 1. So I believe that was part of the surplus from 22. But I'll need to confirm what was done with the remainder.
Okay, that would be great. I remember some discussions about funding a capital reserve for, capital replacements. I think there was a pension funding reserve. There was moved some into the general fund balance. And I can't recall if it was decided what to do with the rest of it, if there was an extra UAL payment that was made or what was done with that. Just trying to get a read on what we actually did decide to do with that surplus last year, just as we're thinking about the current year's surplus.
Okay, yes.
Cassie, would that be part of the final audit? Would that information come out of the
I
audit?
believe it would.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that in the final audit
I believe it would be.
allocation?
And it was $500,000 that was appropriated to various reserve funds, one of which was the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund. I believe council passed that in late June. So, and that was the item that funded the reserves with the surplus.
Okay.
Excuse me, and how much went to pay down the unfunded pension liability?
I believe this year it was 3.2 million that was used to pay down. Maybe it was 2.6. I'll have to double check on that, which probably was a boost from what we typically would pay, but we did make a substantial contribution this year.
So that was what you're referring to is the normal UAL payment that was required, and then the city put in an additional contribution.
Yes, I think we did do a higher than required. So I'll confirm that though.
I believe we all would appreciate this information being transmitted to us and that we don't have to go to the council or review something, because I think we're pretty sensitive to the UAL, unfunded liability. That's the one that we didn't have, we had more than a discussion, we had a motion that was passed about what to do with it, and then the decision was made that you would make the decision later,
Okay.
and we were never told what that was. Well, I mean, I guess if I'd gone to the meeting, I might have heard about it.
I'll go back through the audit and look, see what I can find, but if you could separately confirm it too, that would be great, just so we know what we did last year as we're considering recommendations for what to do with the 23 surplus. Right, were there any other comments on the fiscal 22-23 budget review?
Yes, so partly in what Member Kerr said is that we were talking, if you look at just where what was received, how much was over budget, over what was budgeted, property taxes, the sales and use taxes, and the franchise and other taxes, which constitute 20 million, which is approximately 20% of our budget. I mean, 75% of the budget, 75 to 80%. Those were under budgeted by 16, 25, and 17. And I've been noticing a pattern like that. And I'm always somewhat surprised when we actually see property taxes were 8 million, then 8.6, then 9 million, and then we budgeted for 8 million, which is someone's predicting that there was going to be a real downturn in the real estate, which I kind of understand, but this has been a consistency over the last 3 years that we've underestimated there. And so in lieu of what we're seeing here, are we still going to be budgeting and in this way?
I think a big part of budgeting is trying to find the middle ground between over-expecting your revenue and then also underwriting it as well. We don't really want to make a shortfall there and then create a deficit when one likely won't exist. So I will confirm the numbers for 23-24, but I know it wasn't the budget that I worked on, but I would assume that that would likely be the trend where you wouldn't realize the full amount because the budget was completed as well before the fiscal year ended. So you have to keep that in mind as well before we have the final numbers. The budget is already in the works. So you have to play that middle ground between budgeting for a great outlook and also under budgeting and misidentifying what your revenue is going to be.
So what I see is when we look at the last column of the percentage of adopted budget, the only things that were under are rather small. Total amount being 239,000 or 347,000, except for the transfers in, which I'm not sure why that one was. That's kind of a mystery fluctuating thing that can happen. So it's very unpredictable, I think.
Yes.
But, I mean, it's good. I mean, I'm just saying that I like the idea of being conservative, but are we being realistic? And could we be budgeting differently, which would be more realistic, but then know that we're going to have this money to put in specifically to things like the unfunded pension liability, rather than at the end of the year, then people are kind of, like if we had put aside $2 million at the beginning of the year for the unfunded pension liability, okay? And that was a budgeted item. Then at the end of the year, we'd have the $2 million to put in, and we wouldn't be wondering, what are we going to do with it? But we actually had a plan to pay off the unfunded pension liability, which we still don't have. So it seems the plan is to keep a surplus going, but not doing anything with the pension liability with it.
I think it's a fair point that, especially in revenues that we're consistently seeing overperform, it might be worth an adjustment. Again, maintaining some caution, but I think it is a fair point to try and be as accurate in what we anticipate our revenues will be. So I'll take that note. Concerning the unfunded pension liability, the UAL, staff is currently working on measures to address that. We have a number of revenue measures that we are working with internally across departments, including with the city manager, and that is something we are working towards currently, as opposed to.
Great.
Yes.
You have a projected date, meeting where it might be presented to us?
For that, I believe we would want to have the debt policy come to the committee ahead of any decisions being made. But we are trying to take strides to fund it and actually budget it, include a reserve item for UAL. So we are working on a plan to address it. It is a lot of work, and we are utilizing the assistance of a municipal financial advisor to help us in doing so.
So would you say that by January of next year, there would be something that you'd be able to present to us?
Potential, I would say that's probably too soon. We're aiming for the debt policy, which we need to create by December. So there is progress being made. It just will take time to look into all of the avenues and consider all of the factors, especially when addressing UAL, since it is something that is growing exponentially.
And do you know the change that's happened this year? I mean, is it over 50 million now, or because I know it fluctuates? It was like at 47, wasn't it?
The unfunded pension.
Yeah.
I don't have the current numbers on that because it runs a whole year behind. And I think there was some reporting that came out. Mr. Bone might have reported that in his letter, that the preliminary investment returns were issued, and they were, what? 5.8% for this year that's ending June 23. So they didn't hit the discount rate target again this year.
So it would have gone up by how much?
Well,
Approximately.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, okay. I would love to see that number on a regular basis and incorporated into I've mentioned it in the past, when it's incorporated into our cash reserves, our assets, and then have a liability line.
I think we can probably take that up with future agenda items, and when we get to that section. And there are a couple of things that we're going to propose when we get down to that section, but I want to stay on the budget review topic as closely as we can, and if there are no more comments on that, we can take public comment if there's any.
Actually,
I also wanted
was
to
gonna
make one
say-
comment
okay.
on the property tax item. I also found it interesting, and it got me thinking, and I don't remember what we budgeted for the upcoming cycle.
10
But-
million, I looked it up.
So it is higher?
It's 10 million for 24.
Okay, it's higher than what it was this year?
It
Okay.
looks like the
Maybe that makes the point moot, but I was having a hard time understanding how, given Prop 13 and basically assessments going up 2% max every year, how that number would ever go down from year to year when you have houses typically being reassessed for a much higher property tax value than when they were last sold. And then there's, given the effects of Prop 13, there are plenty of homes that would have gone up more than 2%, but they're capped at 2%. So I just had a hard time understanding how that would fall. But if we've already budgeted an increased number for it, then I think it's a moot point.
I don't remember what exactly the discussion was back when those numbers were proposed, but my hunch is that that biennial budget spanned 2021 through 2023, and we were in the depths of the pandemic when they would have been making that budget, and they were probably being careful about potentially falling property values and things like that, although that's just speculation on my part.
Gotcha. Okay, we can move on.
All right. Is there any public comment? Okay, let's move on to the next item on the agenda in that case. So we're moving on to Section 6, discussion and possible action on matters related to. 6.1 is procedure for advisory bodies providing recommendations to the City Council. Cassie Murphy will be giving us a report on how we can improve our communications with council or to the council.
Thank you. Yes, I thought this was an area I needed to learn this procedure, and I thought it would be helpful to share with all of you, as I feel that in the meetings that I've been in, there have been a few instances where we could have utilized this tool, and it was not utilized. I'm going to share the city website. Oh, actually, I'm not logged into the Zoom. Ava, do you mind going to the city website and sharing, just so I can show you where the procedures are? I did attach the template to the agenda. And the policies and procedures for how to go about this are on the council webpage. And along with that procedure, you can utilize the memo to bring items to the council. The part of the procedure is that the recommendation to council does need to be approved by the entire committee. And so, Ava, if you go to our city, or it might be government actually, where the council is. You see city council. Oh. It's very far. City Council, and then if you scroll down on the bottom right side, Ava, there is the policies and procedures. It's a hyperlink on your right. And open it at the top if you click on council policies and procedures. Yeah, procedures and policies, and then just scroll down to page 9. So this is the detail and kind of the overview in the middle here, the procedure for advisory bodies bringing motions before the city council. So this is kind of, it's just a few quick paragraphs that'll kind of summarize, but just so you can review it on your own if need be. Again, the recommendation on the template that I included in the agenda does need to be approved by the entire committee in order for it to go to council. And the process for that is a member of the committee will write up in draft form on that memo template, accompanying an item on the agenda. And once that is done, they would bring it to the meeting, and it would be discussed by the committee and approved by vote after discussion. Any edits made by committee are captured in that motion. Additional edits are compiled by the original committee member to add to the report as the committee sees fit. And once it's finalized, it would be forwarded to the staff liaison, so that's me. And I would then forward it to the city manager for the memo to be added to the city council's agenda. And so there's a few options here for bringing an item to council. Is it can either be attached to an existing staff report, or it can be sent on its own for consideration to the council, and they would need to put it on the agenda where they see it fits in with their schedule. Some to kind of, and you can stop sharing your screen, Ava. So some instances, just again from my experience with attending these meetings, where I think this could have been utilized was when Member Bowman wrote up the motion to make the statement to City Council regarding the sugar sweetened beverage tax. He wrote up a statement. The entire committee voted on it. I think it would have been a good point from there to have that drafted by Member Bowman and in its entirety presented to council verbatim. There have also, I believe, I can't remember what meeting it was, but Vice Chair Priven and Chair Trainer presented on their findings for UAL and as a part of their subcommittee, and a memo could have been drafted accompanying that, and then the broader discussion could have expanded upon it or edited it down, and then that could have gone to council after that was finalized. So just two instances where I think that could have had more communication between yourself and council so that the recommendation process is a little more clear, and the options that you have.
I think that we, just to make one follow-on comment to that, I think in our work plan that was approved by council, the most recent work plan, we had suggested in that work plan that this committee should report to council on a more regular, more frequent basis. But we were kind of lacking in the mechanism to do that. So I think this is really helpful in that it will allow us to communicate a little more directly with the council on matters that we wish to discuss having to do with these agendas.
And just to add on to that, Kim, I think that the way that our work plan interfaces with what in this template is called City Council Strategic Plan Initiatives is how to link our work plan to the work of the council. So just to sort of have everything tied up and interrelated, I think it is important for our work plan to be referenced in the City Council Strategic Plan Initiative. And I agree, it doesn't need to be an annual report. It could be interjected when it seems appropriate. So this is really helpful. Thank you, Cassie, for digging it out.
Any other comments that anybody has on this topic?
Thank you for reminding me and probably others about having a quarterly report, particularly when we have 8 meetings. But that means, I think that means that you'd actually have to agendize that, because we can't discuss something that isn't on the agenda. We certainly can't make a motion unless it's on the agenda. So I can't just come in here and say, I got this motion, things I want to tell the city council. Unless it somehow is part of a specific agenda item. That's why it would be good to have, as part of our plan going forward, having, February or meeting, if we want to do it quarterly, there's 8 meetings, we could do it every 2 meetings or every 4 meetings. 2 or 4, seems like.
And I would like to kind of speak to, I feel that in the spirit of working with this committee, I think also staff allowing the committee to know when we will bring certain items to council will help with that. For example, the debt policy I'm bringing to the committee will then go on to council after the committee has received the presentation for it. So that would be one instance where the memo could be utilized for the presentation to council to bring the entire committee's recommendation after seeing the policy that is going to be proposed. So communicating that would probably help as well.
How will the mechanics of that work. So let's talk about the debt policy, for example. So if we heard the recommendations, city staff recommendations for the debt policy, let's say, I don't know when this is going to happen, at the December meeting. And then we would need time to, obviously, we'd be discussing it at that meeting. Then somebody from this committee would have to have the time to draw up our memo. And then it would have to be approved again. So that means that that would have to go to the next meeting of the Financial Advisory Committee before it could go to the council. So it seems like there's a really long lead time.
I think at least my understanding of when the process was explained to me is the memo would be drafted ahead of the meeting where the debt policy, and then it is an agendized item on the Financial Advisory Committee's agenda. So debt policy will be brought in December, for example. There's a draft memo written by one of the committee members, and then as part of the discussion, that memo is brought by the committee member, and it is voted on during that meeting. So that would streamline it.
How do we write a memo before we've heard the presentation and discussed it in committee?
The discussion within the committee can be added to the memo and then voted on with those edits, and then the finalized form would have been voted on during the session. So I think the mechanics of that would be you receive the debt policy with the agenda posting, and then a draft with some key points, the discussion ensues, and the committee as a whole votes on the points to be made in the memo to kind of streamline it so that it can then go to council in a quicker succession.
So it would be more of like the memo would be sort of a draft outline of what will be discussed during the committee meeting, because one person can't hope to possibly encapsulate and capture everyone's opinion.
Right.
So it would be sort of an outline of these are the things that we'll discuss, and then we edit it during the meeting.
Yes, so the discussion is captured during the meeting, and the vote is done when all points are heard and the committee as a whole affirms this is the memo they would like to go to council, and these are the words that we would like in there.
So it sounds like we have to have a lot more kind of coordination of the agenda items, I guess from the finance department's part, you knowing when you're planning on bringing these items to the council, backing that up by a month or more if possible, so that it comes to us. And then I guess what we need to do is we're going to have to assign someone. How do we do that? So say it's the debt policy. And how do we go about deciding, well, who's going to write up the memo template before the meeting? And I'm asking all these questions because we're not really supposed to talk amongst ourselves outside of these meetings for Brown Act, possible Brown Act violations, and we don't want to accidentally form a quorum outside of this meeting. So we can't really discuss it amongst ourselves outside the meetings. So does anybody have ideas on, what's the best way to?
I've been going to a lot of meetings for quite a few, over a decade. And my sense when I've come to the meetings is that the city council and all the other committee members kind of make up motions in the middle of the discussion. I know I did that when I made my motion because I was listening to what everyone was saying. And I got, oh, okay, and I'm learning from what I'm being informed from the discussion. And then when I got that sense from everybody there, I made a motion. And then someone had and so I wasn't really prepared for it, in the sense I wasn't thinking of that ahead of time. It just seemed clear that, and anyway, I'm very surprised to hear what you presented to us, that it was part of the policy. And I know a lot of people who are on committees and they're not quite doing it that way. And sometimes people make up motions, and I've seen it on the city council level. Then the city, it's not the the city clerk is sitting there taking notes, or Jeff Bond is taking notes and making, so that, and then clarifying what's the friendly amendments, because there's lots of amendments. I'll go back and read that again.
So, and I did get confirmation that you can also, after the discussion, designate a committee member to write the memo based on the discussion that was had during the meeting. And to my example, when there was the vote on Member Bowman's statement to go to council, that it was a discussion that happened during the presentation, and it was voted on, and that could have been drafted as a memo. So it wasn't ahead of time, it occurred as part of the discussion during the session, during the agenda item.
That makes sense. For that one, we discussed it kind of verbatim. So if we had motioned to make the statement and for me to draft the memo, I could have done that. It's a little bit more complex when it's a lengthy memo, but if we entrust someone to capture the essence of the discussion, I think that could work.
Make a motion, you got to write a memo.
Okay, any other comments about this? Mark, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, originally, I was thinking that we would, like for the debt memo, we would need to appoint somebody in November so that when the agenda comes out a week before the meeting, that person could kind of put together an outline, and then we could kind of fill in the main points during the meeting. But what Member Bowman just said makes sense. Maybe we could make the decision about who that appointed person is during the meeting. I don't know. But it might be nice in this case to know in a month in advance. Like, so for example, in November, that person knows, oh, okay, pay special attention to this agenda item, have some thoughts in mind already about how the memo is going to go, so that during the meeting, they can kind of be preparing that in
So,
their
yeah.
head at least.
Yeah, it can be, again, either that method or after the discussion is had, the committee can say, assign someone in the session and after the presentation, please summarize the points and draft in a memo.
And
Yeah,
I would
got
seem like, let's say I was just designated to draft the memo, I think it would be a good idea that I took the draft to the chair and had the chair, whoever's the chair at that point, just give it, oh yeah, that looks like it. Yeah, that's good. Got it. Or maybe this part here. Just leaving it up to one person
Right, just to have
who's
some,
an interested party, if it was me, and I'd want to make sure that just, I got the feeling that I like that process, whoever's the chair at that time.
with that would
Coming up.
be whoa, look at, there's like a disco thing happening there. So that would be an acceptable process, right? To have the designated member write the memo, and then the chair could review and say, oh, just a point of understanding, this is not how I understood that to be. And then those two work it out together. So that's just two individuals from the committee working on that memo. That would be acceptable, right?
I'll have to clarify that piece.
Okay.
So I will clarify that if that's appropriate.
Okay, because that does give me pause a little bit, just sort of
Right.
putting all of the committee's comments in the hands of one person who maybe forgot to put in a point.
Right.
Or something that, that we wanted to have in there.
Right, then you'd have the same problem we faced previously, right? The intention I was hoping is that we can get the entire committee's recommendation as the committee voted. So finding a way to make that work, I can follow up with a written procedure too to clarify any points that were brought up.
That'd be really helpful. I guess this is, it's hard to work this out, so this is probably why we haven't, you know, gotten this done before. With respect to that debt policy, and I know we're going to talk about future agenda items in another couple of agenda points on this particular agenda, I was thinking it would make sense to see if there was anyone in the room who wanted to maybe work on that, or in the case of future things that might come up, you and I work together on setting the agendas for the future meetings, and I could suggest, I think this member might be a good person to write up the outline because they're interested in this topic, or that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be helpful for input from this committee on that policy. So that would be helpful to coordinate with a committee member on that.
Any other comments on this point? Do you have any public comment on this?
I did receive confirmation that 2 committee members can prepare it with each other as well.
We
Yes,
can
it
do
can
that.
be when there's 2 committee members preparing it to confirm all points are hit.
Okay, great. All right, so then let's move on to item 6.2, which is the fall calendar of meeting items.
And can you share and pull that up, Ava? If you'd like a visual, I know it was sent to the committee. I thought it might be helpful to look at it together. I know. Yeah. Can you zoom in? Can you hit Control and scroll forward? Not much of an aid if we can't read it.
There we go.
I know.
Okay, so the top one is this current meeting, October, and we're going through all of those items. So what we need to pay attention to is the November and December meeting agenda items. So for November, you've got update on investment results and the banking risk presentation. And then I went back through our notes from the previous year to see what was discussed at different times. And would we expect to receive the Q1 '24 finance report at this meeting in November?
Yes, that's when I'm aiming to present it. So I think I'm going to stick with that as my deadline for the November meeting.
Okay. And then also, last year at the end of the year, we worked on writing up a work plan report from the committee's work from the past, I guess it's calendar year, I think, because we prepared that report for, I believe it was one of the December council meetings. So that probably would need to be on the November agenda as well, right? Is that required every year? It is, right?
I
the
will
work plan?
confirm. I think that yours has expired as of June, so I believe we do need a new one.
We did a new work plan at some point last year. I guess that's a question. Do we need to have a new
Okay.
work plan? I feel like we did renew that, but maybe it's coming up again. And then we're supposed to just report on the items that we discussed, or, that we worked on during the year from the work plan. So it seems like that should be an agenda item, so we could review the work plan and start to discuss together what our responses will be.
For which month? November?
To be November.
I think it would have to be November because I think we have to, that has to go to council at some point in December, right?
If they agendize it, yeah.
It's not a sort of a, this has to happen every year kind of a thing, or is it just whenever they agendize it?
I'll confirm. I don't think it does, but I'm not sure if it does
Okay.
need to go
I
every
think
year.
some commissions have not reported their work plans for a while, so
Okay.
I think I don't think there's a hard, fast rule.
Okay.
But Cassie can tell us.
That'd be nice to know, yeah. If we have to do it, we should put it on the November agenda. Then, property taxes in December, and is that, what exactly does that mean?
So I kind of wanted to discuss with the committee that was an item that was requested by the committee. So what is the committee interested in learning about in terms of property taxes?
Well, earlier this year, I mean, I've stated that I was interested in kind of giving an explanation of how the property taxes work, because I noted that many people don't really know. They just kind of open up their tax bill, they pay their bill, and they don't really know they just know the number that they have to pay and how that changes from year to year. And so I had mentioned this, and then Heather had actually asked me at one point this spring when there was a kind of a short agenda in there, and said, well, she called me up and said, or emailed me, would I like to do the presentation next week? And I said, no, I needed more time to do that because I wanted to have the proper things that would be, attachments to explain things, and I wanted to think it and plan it out. So I would be very happy to do a property tax education that would be both for the group and for the public, that it would be something that people could refer to in detail about how it works. And maybe even incorporating into that, I realized who the biggest property tax people are, how the university, what they're paying, and how it's calculated. I'd also brought up the issue of the development, the Sprouts development, and what they were paying, and how that was calculated. So it was complicated. And that part I definitely have to learn more. And I will definitely need your help in getting those facts and figures out.
Is that, so I feel like that could be an agenda item for December, if that does sound like the committee feels that's what they would like to hear. I did reach out to one of our consultants, NBS, regarding property taxes. They did let me know that they reported in June to the council during one of the study sessions, I believe, and they forwarded me the information from that session. So if members weren't able to attend and would like an additional information from Member Papalia, and that kind of to go alongside it, that can be an agenda item for that.
What was the group? You said MBS?
NBS, yes.
NBS. I would love to see that.
I can find the date that was done so that the video can be reviewed as well.
I think that would be a good topic for review. It's our single largest revenue line item. So I would like to hear a report on that. And then that MBS report could be incorporated into that discussion. Member Bowman, do you have a comment?
Yeah, tagging on to that, I think there was some dialogue over the summer about Golden Gate Fields, and that was a large source of property taxes. I believe staff put together a website on the potential impact of it closing, but I think that just strikes me as something that seems like it should be a topic that this committee should be well aware of the potential outcomes. So I'm wondering if that could or should be worked into the property tax discussion or as a separate future agenda item.
I think adding it to property tax makes sense. Part of the struggle with the analysis is it is still changing and it's not definite what is happening and when things are ending. That date has also shifted since the announcement was made. So reporting it alongside property taxes does make sense, and considering it for a future agenda item would likely make sense when there's a more definitive path of what's going to happen with that property.
One thing about that property is that it pays parcel taxes.
Right.
And so knowing what that is part of what the thing I would, as one of the largest property owners, you want to know who they are and how they're contributing to the parcel taxes and how they're contributing to the bond measures. Because the amount of money from the racing has drastically changed in the last 30 years, drastically gone down.
You could include that in your
Oh,
discussion.
yeah. Thank you for
And I think
reminding me
just
about
us
that.
getting a snapshot in terms of the facts as they are known today, and understanding that some things may change is a reasonable possibility. But should there be any decision made on the future of that property, I would think that this committee would be well positioned to opine and advise City Council if they're making decisions. So I'd love to just understand the current fact base.
Would you want to work on this with me in a sense and like take that topic over or not? The December meeting?
And I don't know that I'm the person that should be presenting on the fact base. It sounds like staff provided a write-up, and I don't think this needs to be extensive, but especially if the facts are changing, I think what I'd request is a short debrief from staff in terms of what we know and what the options on the table are, just so we're all on the same page.
Something we can consider from December. I feel like by that point, there might be additional information aside from what's on the current page. So that might be a good check-in point.
Cassie, I wonder if you would share with us and the public the page that you're referring to, because I don't think everybody is aware of it, and I think it would be real easy to put it up there and show folks what is out there as current information on the status of Golden Gate Fields. Can you pull it up?
The way I always find it, just go to Google and do Golden Gate Fields. It'll be the first web page.
And then while you're doing that, if I could just also make a comment about the November item called banking risk. Twice now we've had public comment requesting us to consider public bank. And I wonder if, when we talk about banking risk, if we could also have at least a passing discussion of the public bank proposal that's come from the public twice now. It might be a nice way to agendize that, to get it in. But I'm not really sure what the topic banking risk will cover, so it might not be a fit, so.
I think that banking risk topic was just a discussion of, in light of some of the regional bank failures that happened in the spring, with FDIC limits for normal accounts being $250,000, the city holds well in excess of those amounts at a single bank, Mechanics Bank. And so we wanted to get an overview of how does the city manage that credit concentration risk with having all of those funds at Mechanics Bank. And I think Heather Rowden had mentioned that there was some mechanism for mitigating that risk, but I didn't really get the details of that. So that's what I'd like to hear about.
Yes, that is, the item is to address that concern after the Silicon Valley Bank fell. So I got some information from our current banker to present to committee to show how we mitigate that risk. And I will look into the Public Bank of the East Bay. And I imagine, just from the information I have, the banking risk discussion will be fairly short. So I can create a overall banking discussion for that agenda item.
It'd be interesting to compare the relative risks, if there is an analysis that's possible with that.
And also if there are guidelines or policies that the city does have in place with respect to selecting banking relationships. You know, what are the qualifications that are required, or is there something to that effect?
So what our policy is. Okay, that makes sense.
So then also I like that comment, though, that's a way to get the, I think it's called the Public Bank of the
Public
East
Bank,
Bay.
yeah, of the East Bay.
We can get a discussion of that into the agenda. Then the other item that we have mentioned a couple times, but is on the December agenda, is the debt policy discussion. So we all know that it's coming in December, and we can have that on the agenda then.
I had a little bit of passing interest in the debt policy this past week, and I pulled up the City of Berkeley's revisions for their debt policy, and I've been looking at them. So I'm sure that when the City of Albany drafts things, we will be using peer policies, and it's pretty complicated language, but the overall goal of the revisions that they're proposing is pretty easy to understand. So.
Okay.
So,
Sorry, and we'll share we got lost in the banking discussion, but this is the page related to Golden Gate Field.
thank you. I knew you'd find it.
Yes, it was sitting on her screen, but
We got locked.
yes. So this is the current information related to the transition of Golden Gate Field's closing since the announcement. The initial closure was December of this year. It has moved to June of 2024. That's one of the changes. So this is an ongoing and shifting situation, which we will see how, again, where things land and what continues to shift as the situation unfolds.
Are there other suggestions by members of the committee for calendar items for the November or December meetings? And Member Bowman has raised his hand.
Yeah, Member Priven and I met with Cassie and Heather over the summer on the KPI report and received their feedback and have incorporated that. I think we can agendize that on the next, probably the November agenda, and potentially put forward a motion to utilize that if the committee agrees.
Yes, so we did meet in June, and I wanted to see with the two of you, I know that you worked pretty significantly on some numbers and some items you wanted to look at, and we left that meeting that there would be work that was done to kind of make that a turnkey, something that staff could easily maintain, and the work had not been completed. So we do not have anything prepared for that item. I know, again, the two of you had some numbers that you thought would be good to present and potentially with context. I'm wondering if with the current staffing situation for finance, this could be something that potentially we could shift to more of a memo format, and I can discuss it with the two of you outside of the committee meeting and see what direction we can take with this. to somewhat address the intention behind it, we are trying to revamp the finance webpage to give more digestible and information that the general public can potentially look at and see. So just something I'll follow up with the both of you and kind of give you an update on where we're at with that. We currently don't have anything prepared for that to move forward.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that you have something prepared. I was suggesting we bring back
Your findings?
the revision of the potential KPI report so that the whole committee could see it in terms of where we landed and what might be feasible to produce long term. And then during that meeting, we can discuss the feasibility of producing something like this or putting that information elsewhere. I don't think there's any work for staff to do before November.
Okay. Does the committee feel like adding that to November with the current items, the quarter one report, banking discussion, and the investment report? Would we like 4 points on that agenda?
Any opinions on that? I'm inclined to put it on the agenda because we've been sort of pushing it back for a while, and I think it is an important thing to try to develop and have that discussion to make these reports more accessible to the public and to the council. And I know it's something that we've been kicking around for a while, so I'd like to at least have the discussion, hear the update from Mark and Kyle.
Okay. We can add it to November.
I know this discussion is sort of morphing into the future agenda items piece, so maybe if there aren't more comments on the calendar as presented, we could take public comment, and then we can continue with the future agenda items section for any other things that we need to discuss. Are there any public comments on the calendar? Okay, just trying to stick to the agenda. So item 7 is future agenda items, where members can suggest additional topics for discussion.
Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier this evening was our work plan and the status of the work plan. So I think in January, we should definitely have the answer to when our work plan was or needs to be written, revised, and begin a subcommittee to work on that. So that would be a January agenda item.
January.
Assuming we have a meeting in January, I'm not sure. Last year, I think we skipped January, but I'm not.
I guess last year was before we technically moved to the 8
It was, that's true. That's true.
format, and
So next meeting, whenever it is.
whenever that is, Cassie, do you know when the next meeting will be after the December meeting?
I don't think we scheduled that far out, so we'll need to place the 8 meetings for 2024.
So whenever the next meeting is after that, I
yeah,
think the work plan should
December.
be part of that
Yeah,
conversation.
we'll see what makes sense. Maybe give the committee a break after December and to reconvene in February, but we can see what makes sense with having the next meeting and 2024 as a whole.
Okay. I did have a couple of items that I wanted to bring up for future agenda items, and Cassie and I had discussed putting an agenda item on as a standing agenda item to hear subcommittee updates. So we have a revenue subcommittee and a pension subcommittee. And if we had a standing agenda item, we could hear any updates. It gives us a good forum to keep the discussion going. Mark Priven and I have been working on some data gathering and benchmarking type things with respect to pensions. And I know we haven't heard from the revenue subcommittee in a while, and there are, I think that we should just, have a forum where you can update us on what you're working on. So how do we all feel about just having that be a standing agenda item? And if there's nothing to discuss, there's nothing to discuss.
It sounds fine to me. It's possible we could do revenue 1 month, and then the following, we could alternate them, stagger them. I don't know that the revenue subcommittee will have a monthly update. I think that could change if council moves ahead with some of the projected revenue changes that they're thinking about, but they're a little bit ahead of us in that. So I'm not sure we're going to have a role to discuss some of the potential plans that are coming out of council now. But we certainly could, from the revenue, speaking for both of us here, if you think we could do at least every other meeting presentation.
You actually mentioned what I was going to say, which is I wanted to find out if Cassie could tell us what is being talked about or considered between the city manager and the council and the finance department about potential new sources of revenue. I'm sure they're doing stuff about that. So the question is, and we've made a bunch of ideas, but the revenue subcommittee would love to get feedback from the finance director, the city council, and the city administrators' ideas of what things we should be exploring.
If I may, I think we could review the minutes of the council meetings, and that could be part of our presentation as well. We could gather that, take that off of staff. I'm not sure staff needs to be the source of that information because it's public meeting information. So I'm happy to go back. I've listened to some of the council meetings and have taken some notes. I'm not prepared to present it tonight, but I think we could, as a revenue subcommittee, we could actually do that. That could be part of how we present. So when council takes some action with regard to revenue, we're on top of it. And it may have come from something that we generated and presented to them last December, I think, or it may be something that they generated themselves. But I think that's our job, to do that.
There was a revenue measures overview that was prepared by Heather and Nicole Almaguer. How do you pronounce her name? I always mispronounce her name.
It's Almaguer.
Almaguer?
Yeah.
Okay. The two of them prepared a report for the June 20th meeting of the city council, and I believe that was posted was that posted as part of the agenda to this meeting? Because somehow I got it.
Without going to council meeting.
Right.
This meeting?
Was it posted as part of this meeting, or was that part of a discussion where you and I were talking about should we have a revenue review item as an agenda item?
I brought it up because we presented, myself and other staff on Monday to council about the revenue measures that we're looking into. So I did bring that up, and we do have a staff report with the details on what we are discussing and studying and researching currently from this past Monday.
I think that would be a great thing for the revenue subcommittee to review, and
We can review that and present that as part of our report. I think that makes a lot of sense.
and then as far as the pension subcommittee goes, something that we have discussed in previous meetings and that I think we want to not lose sight of is developing a pension funding policy. So that could be part of a report that the pension subcommittee can make, and Mark Priven and I can work on that together. But if we have this standing subcommittee agenda item, then there's a space for giving those updates.
I like the idea of having kind of a standing space for the subcommittees to report out. I just think it'll be important when you're coming up with the agenda, so that the meetings, you have a sense of how long the meetings will take. Of, check in with the subcommittee first and go, this is going to be a 5-minute update, or, oh, we have some stuff we really want feedback on and blah, blah, blah. This could take a half hour or whatever. So just, as long as you all get that, a sense of that in advance, I think that's going to be an important part of just managing the meeting.
Yep.
agree. I think in the spirit of the update, yes, a brief update and then potentially leading into a discussion. Do we want to make it a larger agenda item? Does the subcommittee have a larger presentation? So that is a good point. Thank you.
Any other comments on future agenda items?
I have had an overriding concern about the ability to the public in general to understand what we're talking about. And so I would love to have a topic where we discuss how we can make the reports and more accessible and understandable to the public.
Yes.
That might actually bring more participation from people.
I agree with that, and I am actually working on giving information that's, again, more digestible and still have the level of detail for analysis, but isn't quite so lengthy and is a little more capturing a broad overview. So that is something I am working on. I hope to implement for the quarter one report. So that is something I am trying to implement as well.
You may not have been here when this group really started. And Heather actually had a very interesting PowerPoint presentation where she was breaking down what all these different things were. Do you remember? And it was like, because we had no idea of what all this stuff was. So like, starting with what's a fiscal year, and then how you plan a budget, and then have a 2-year budget, and what's an audit, what's a state audit, and what's an internal audit, kind of thing. So that's what I meant, is if it would be great to have something like that becomes like an accessible thing that could be shared with people. That it's kind of not a simplified version, but an explanation of what, in general, like what camp is.
Maybe a glossary.
Yes,
what you're
that's the word I
talking
was
about.
thinking about. That's exactly. Glossary of terms, so that could be posted and as a reference. Because most people, when you go to social and economic justice, they know what people are talking about. Okay, if they're going to arts committee, they're not using language which is necessarily brand new or indecipherable.
That could be a big project.
Yes, I would shy away from a glossary. But sorry, I didn't mean to.
I'd work on it. I mean, I just come up with a series of, go through it, and I know the things that
I think something like that is a good project, and maybe that's something that we work on, or people can add things that occur to them that might not be that understandable.
That's right. So
And
we
so
have an
you could-
agenda item in which we all bring in what is it that we what we think the public needs to know, and then what we didn't have a clue about, and then we found out.
So we could potentially add that to a future meeting, and in the meantime, I think everybody starts just thinking of things that they would want to add to that list. I wouldn't want to make that something that we would put on the city staff to have to do, but I think if we could come up with some definitions that you could review and make sure that they're accurate, then maybe something like that could be done. Okay, anything else on agenda items?
I kind of went through all the public comment stuff just to make sure we covered everything, and it seems between the metrics and the pension and the revenue enhancement, we've covered everything, especially if we also have a presentation or a discussion about the public bank. The only thing is the Airbnb. I just want to make sure that that's part of the scope of the revenue enhancement committee. That's something that committee's going to be looking at.
We do have an Airbnb tax, although we don't know what it is, but we'll find out what it is and whether it
Okay.
is in line with other people and other cities. Could it be enhanced? Should it be
Okay.
enhanced?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Is there any public comment on future agenda items? Okay, the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for Wednesday, November 1st, 7 PM. It's 8:53 PM, and we are adjourned. Thank you.